Person would like to know if they have experience doing faith study or participating in missionary work. Is this something acceptable to be included in a resume?
There's no right answer to this one. Most often, and I've seen this before, I would say yes, include it because you often demonstrate such excellent skills. If you've led groups, if you've volunteered and worked with needy people, if you've served people, these are all skills that employers care about. Now, I know sometimes people are sensitive about putting the actual religious institution or the name of it, and they don't want to disclose that. I don't think personally it's a problem. We live in a very multicultural society, at least in the bigger cities across Canada. It couldn't be more normal to have people right next to you of different backgrounds. That may not be the case in some of the smaller cities in Canada or smaller places. Generally, I find it is totally acceptable. You might have it in the volunteer section. If you're sensitive about putting the actual institution, you might just say, volunteer workshop leader, comma, faith-based institution, and not name it, 2010 to present or whatever it was, but then use those bullet points to really describe to the reader what you've done. If you've led workshops or classes, led 27 classes with, on average, 50 students, interacted with parents about their children, those are awesome points to put in your resume, and they do make a difference to employers. So I'd say, absolutely yes. And if you're sensitive about some of the specifics, you can get around that if you feel like that's important. So great question, and thanks for that one.
Somebody's wondering whether if they've worked at a place either for part-time or full-time, and they don't really have a favorable relationship with their employer. Is it something that they should, is this job still something they should include on their resume?
Yeah, great. So references are really an important question. And I want you all to think about references, because if you get through that interview process and they like you and you're one of the 1 or 2 go forward candidates, they will ask you for references. And at that stage, and only at that stage, is it appropriate to give out references. You do not need to include references on your resume, and you shouldn't. You don't want anybody calling your references. They're very special people. Now, it is true that sometimes we've left on not great terms, and our boss or whoever won't give us a great reference. So, here's what I found about that. Again, there's not a hard and fast rule. If it was a significant chunk of work and time, and you got some great skills, it's really important to include that. And how to get around the reference situation, we'll talk about that in a second. But you wouldn't want to miss out on something that was a significant chunk of time, that you don't include because you don't necessarily have a great reference. So, if it was significant, include it, and let's talk about the reference in a minute. If, on the other hand, it was a small thing, you only worked there for a month, or it was a smallish piece of time, and you had some really bad interaction there, and the next most recent thing was pretty good, well, you could leave it off. So that's what I found people do. Mostly people do leave it on. It's true that not everybody wants to give you a good reference. So you know what? When it comes time to giving a reference, you list the references that you want to give, right? They've said to you, please, give us, hey, Juanita, give us those references, and you give them 2 or 3 references. And often they just take them, and they'll call or email or do whatever they'll do, and not another word will be said. They may say, gee, Juanita, why are you not giving us a reference from your most recent employer? And then you might just have to deal with the fact that it didn't end on great terms, but I think you want to put it in a very positive light. So think about this little message, and this is a little trick that I found has been very effective whenever you have some bad news to say. It's a sandwich approach. It's good news, good news, bad news, good news. So the bad news is sort of sandwiched between 2 pieces of good news. And so the employer is saying to you, Juanita, why are you not giving us a reference from your most recent employer? So, good news. It's true that my most recent job gave me some excellent skills. I developed some excellent research and analysis skills. It's true that I didn't have a great relationship with one of the people there, but that was something that was entirely, it was personal. And what I can assure you is that the reference from my second most recent position when I worked at the ABC company is really an appropriate reference who can speak to my skills and experiences. So there you go. You need to respond to a question like that. If you just have a meltdown when the employer asks you that question, you're in trouble. So you do need to put it in a favorable light. Sometimes people say it was, that little piece of bad news. It was a personality difference. Like, that's a very neutral way to say something. It's true that we had a personality difference, and that's why I'm going to give you the reference of my second most recent job. Okay, so the bad news piece can be 2 words. That's all. Don't, cry over that spilled milk. Don't spend 10 minutes telling them about the situation. Move on. Deal with it. Get 2 or 3 or 4 words to talk about it and move on. And that should do it. And that generally works in your favor as long as the rest of your references are in good shape. Okay, so I hope that responds to the question. I think that also deals with that second part of it. If the former, if they find out about your former employment. So I think you can get around that. I'm a foodie and love gardening. I know the jobs are out there right now, but where do I begin? Networking in a small town filled with nepotism. How do I get in? Right on. Foodie and love gardening. There's a demonstrated interest, and I actually like using the term demonstrated interest on a resume. So this is something you can think of if your foodie interest and your gardening interest. Maybe you worked at the local nursery or the gardening place. Great, then you'd have that in the experience section of your resume, or you worked at some food store. Great. Let's say you haven't. A demonstrated interest at the bottom of your resume. Don't do those lame things that people do when they say, interests are reading and travel and movies. Like, that is a waste of time. Take those interests. If you're a foodie, okay, prove it. Demonstrated interest means show me in some way that you are a foodie. So it might say under demonstrated interest, foodie. And then it might say, subscribe to this or that blog of recipes. Prepare 3 new meals every week. Favorite ingredients are the, fresh balsamic vinegar from, this Italian manufacturer, and name one of them. Like, show me in 3 lines that you're a foodie. That one line in your demonstrated interest could be enough to get you an interview for a cool job in some, some food establishment or fine food place that you like. So demonstrated interests that you prove are really worth it, and you can get lots of mileage. And honestly, I would put it in my profile. If I were applying to some fine food restaurant or fine food store in the city, and I didn't have any experience, but I was a foodie and I could prove it because of the blogs that I read or the whatevers, I would put that right in my profile, right up there. So that's, I think, something that you can really think about. Getting it on paper, I think people feel very confident about stuff when they get stuff like that on paper, and it makes it a little bit more, I don't know, a little bit more legitimate than just putting foodie as an interest. Let's see. We have one. Is there any job position for the people who graduated out of Canada? So thanks for that question. Like, we have dealt with people from over 80 countries of origin, and I know people are coming here from Iran, from China, from Colombia, from Vietnam. People are coming here from all corners of the globe, and they come here with great education and experience. How do you deal with that? It's a bigger question than I think we can respond to in a couple of minutes here. I do find, though, more and more that Canadian employers are being smarter about digesting international education and experience. For sure, if you have international education or experience, it's nice for the employer to know that you have some Canadian exposure. Even if it's not paid work, if you have a section in your resume that says Canadian experience, and even if you have a survival job there and you worked at Tim Hortons, you became familiar with the Canadian work environment. Or maybe you had a post at a post-secondary institution here in Canada, even though maybe you did a master's degree here but an undergrad in another country. you can put that experience on your resume. I find when employers see that you have some Canadian something, whether it's education, even volunteer experience, they start to warm up to your international experience. So they have the section, you have a section in your resume called Canadian experience, and then another section called international experience. And then they can warm up to your international experience because they've seen your Canadian experience. So I'd encourage you to volunteer. There's zillions of volunteer opportunities. Every city in Canada has some kind of volunteer portal. If you live in the Greater Toronto Area, volunteertoronto.ca has all kinds of opportunities. I know Montreal has the same thing. You know, getting good volunteer experience on your resume, and then you say Canadian experience, and you have that volunteer gig, makes it easier for the Canadian employer to digest your international experience. Do the best you can explaining your international degree or diploma. Try and give a Canadian equivalent. Include the project that you did when you did your degree in whatever country, your home country. So I think it's really important to say that, and then go ahead. Like, are there any positions? Yeah, every position is open to you. You know, in the Greater Toronto Area, there are more people who weren't from Toronto or from Canada than there are. So, you know, it's normal. Many Canadian employers get it. You just need to help them contextualize your international education and experience. So let me say thanks, everybody, for your questions and for your info here. Do drop us a line. You can get that 7-page handout thing that I was using before. If you email us, we'll get you on the Spark newsletter. Do tune into the stories there. And, you know, access your Career Center or access us. We are, you know, we're around. We've worked with clients across the country by phone and Skype. And if you're in Toronto, it can be face-to-face, but resume and Skype work fine.